Hello and welcome back to Insemination, the podcast that is all things donor conceived. My name is Laura High, your chaotic sperm donor baby of the podcast world. I'm so sorry that I've been gone for a few weeks. Things have been chaotic, the world has been on fire, and I've not really known what to do. And I've been trying to figure out what best episodes and interviews serve us right now, and I've just been sort of in a little bit of an existential crisis, but I think I have an episode for you that actually really fits the bill very well. As many of you know, we passed incredible Colorado legislation in 2022 by USDCC and so many incredible people that submitted testimony. Well, our bill went into effect this year in beginning of January, which was incredible. But then, Donor Egg Bank USA and California Cryobank, which are both owned by Cooper Surgical, wrote their own bill that essentially gutted our original bill. So that's no good, that's no fun. So here to talk about that is Steve Fenberg, who not only introduced our original Colorado legislation, but he is the former Senate president of Colorado. So we about to go into some legislative weeds. Yes! All right, this is gonna be fun. But I do want everyone to know, though, that when we recorded this episode, the bill went through its first round of hearings, and which were great, and that was awesome and wonderful. Then we did this episode, and then very, very recently, like literally a couple of days ago, we got and received an amended bill, but the amendments were so itty-bitty, you could barely tell. It moved an inch, and that's probably being generous. And it immediately, without any kind of testimony, was heard in the committee and passed the committee. Now, I believe that the next step is this new bill is just going to the Senate. Take that with a grain of salt, but that is what I have been told, what we believe is the next step. And once we do have hard dates of when this is getting introduced to the Senate, I am starting to plan for a protest in Colorado, because this is deplorable behavior. This is absolutely outrageous. We cannot let this go We cannot let this go forward. The fact that we have these massive companies that are allowed to write bills to remove regulations from themselves and actively keep donor-conceived people out of the conversation is absolutely, it's just vile behavior. So please make sure that you are following me on all social media because I am going to be moving very, very fast on this one and seeing if I can put together a protest. It most likely will be in the next few weeks. So let's see. I don't know if I can do it, but we're going to try really, really hard because this has to happen. But yeah, okay, so let's get to the episode. Let's do just a little baby bit of housekeeping. First, follow me on all social media platforms, especially if you're one of my TikTok followers. We don't know what the hell's going to happen with TikTok, so make sure you're following me all other places. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Threads. I'm not on X, so don't do that. I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube. I think Instagram, did I say Instagram? So please follow me on all other places. And this episode will be dropping March 20th. March 20th and 21st, I'm headlining for the first time in Boston. Yay! I'm really, really excited. I've always wanted to headline in Boston. On March 20th, I'm going to be headlining the Comedy Studio, and on March 21st, I'm headlining the Glove Box Comedy Club. I'm so excited. If you're in the area, please come out. Both of my shows are neurodivergent friendly, which means that you will actively have the choice to opt in or opt out of crowd work. You are allowed to bring in like knitting, crochet, a coloring book, anything that helps you focus and stay happy and groovy as long as it doesn't make noise or light up. So yeah, please come out. I'm so excited. And also, I'm part of the Big Pine Comedy Festival that is coming to Chandler, Arizona. The comedy festival is April 2nd through the 5th. My specific shows are all on my website on www.laurahighfive.com. Y'all are fantastic. You all are amazing. All of my shows are on my website. But let's get to the episode because we want to go into legislative weeds. Huzzah. And welcome to the podcast, Steve. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing well. We are going to dive right into this episode because we don't have a lot of time. And I know that all of my followers are really going to want to hear what you have to say. For people who really want to go into the weeds of legislation, like this is your moment. This is our episode. Steve, before we start, I would love for you to just tell all of my listeners kind of who you are, what your experience is, and what is it that you do, just so that they kind of I want you to flex a little bit.
All right. Well, I'll try. So my name is Steve Fenberg, and I'm out here in Colorado. I am a recently recovering politician. So I served in the Colorado State Senate for 8 years, and I just recently left a couple of months ago. Not because I was voted out, but because I was term limited. So in Colorado, we have term limits. You can only do 8 years in the legislature
Love
before you have to
that.
leave. Yeah, it's like good and bad, but my wife really likes it because she's happy for me to get a real job. But yeah, so I served in the legislature for 8 years. I was the Senate Majority Leader, and then I became the Senate President, which was honestly like a lot of fun, kind of the honor of my lifetime, and allowed me to really just sort of dive in deep on issues that I care a lot about, that I'm passionate about, and it really is an awesome experience to
Mhm.
be in a state legislature in a state like Colorado, and be able to identify the things that you're most passionate about and
Yeah.
truly make progress on them. So it was a great experience. Was sent out to pasture after my 8 years, and now I'm kind of I'm kind of a free agent at the moment, which is sort of fun. I'm doing some consulting on some policy issues,
Mhm.
working on some issues that I found myself being incredibly passionate about and interested in. So that runs the gamut, but yeah, I'm settling into my new life of retirement
I love
um,
that for
at
you.
the ripe age of 41.
Well,
But yeah,
we've pulled you back in pretty quickly.
yeah, in some ways,
So
yeah,
I know it was a short-lived retirement because it's all hands on deck right now in Colorado.
that's right. So in 2022, I introduced a bill that is called the Donor Conceived Persons and Families Protection Act. It's
Yes.
kind of a mouthful, but basically what it did is it looked at what the best practices are already in the industry. It maybe in some ways modified them, really kind of tried to customize them for a state like Colorado or for
Mhm.
legislative purposes, and passed, I would say, the first law in the United States that really is meant to comprehensively protect donor conceived people and their families,
Yeah.
and address many of the issues that have been, I would say, sort of nagging at this process or this industry for a long time,
Yeah.
in modernize, helping the industry sort of modernize and employ best practices to
Well,
protect everyone involved.
it's the first real law that's been put in recent like very recently that's been like actually kind of bringing us it's been bringing us to the forefront because a lot of people do not understand that the United States is very like our fertility industry is very archaic.
Hmm.
Most countries that we would have considered our ally are significantly more progressive. Like these laws that we put in Colorado are not just basic, it's very kind of bar on the floor. And a
Oh
lot of
yeah,
people
for sure. Yeah.
and a lot of people don't realize it. I mean, when I tell people that like we're one of the only countries that does not have a family limit on how many babies can be made from one donor, people always kind of look at me like I have three heads. And
Hmm.
especially when I'm like, and this bill that you introduced, it was a 25 family limit. For anyone who doesn't know what that means, is one donor is allowed to donate for 25 families. So each of those families can grow how they want. If they want one kids, two kids, three
Hmm.
kids, that's fine. But only 25 families are allowed to use those gametes. And everyone's like, that still seems really high. And I'm like, it 100% is, but it's a start. And right now we have to start somewhere.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with you. I've had the similar experience where I
Mhm.
explain to people the basics of the bill, and they're like, "Huh, why isn't that already the law, or why isn't this a federal law that applies it to everybody?"
Yeah.
And they really are. I think it's a relatively low bar what's in this bill,
Yeah.
and really just real quickly, I guess, for your listeners, what it does is it does, number one, what you said, it creates a family limit per donor,
Mhm.
and it's 25 families, so that could be 50, 75 children per
I mean,
donor. It's still quite a
it's
lot.
still way too much, but it's a start.
Yeah. And then it also requires the bank periodically every 3 years to reach out to the donor and ask for any medical updates, which
Which,
many of the banks already do annually, if not more often. And this bill just requires them to do it once every 3 years. And it could be a postcard, it could be an email, it could
and
be a
we,
robocall, it could be
and we
something really
all,
easy.
we all know those medical updates literally are life-saving. I mean, the amount of donor-conceived people, recipient
Oh,
parents
absolutely.
who have come forward and said, saying that this update would have changed my child's trajectory, this would have saved them years of suffering, it maybe would have saved their life. I mean, it really, or when they do have that update, they're like, this did save my child's life. I mean, the amount of
Oh yeah,
recipient,
no,
yeah,
that we're talking about saving life. It's life-saving information,
yeah,
right? How often do you go to a doctor and they ask you if you have a history of blank?
hmm
And for a donor
every
conceived
time,
person, they often just don't know the answer
yeah.
unless they have a relationship with or
hmm
somehow know the complete medical history of
They
their
have some
donor.
kind
So
of line of
it's very
communication.
important.
Yeah,
Yeah. So that's one of the things it does. It also, I think, probably the biggest policy that it accomplished was making sure that all donors who donate from this point forward
Mhm.
know that upon the child turning 18,
Yes.
if the child wants to, they can ask for the identifying information and
Yeah.
medical history of that donor. So a lot of folks aren't going to be interested in that. It might not be important for everybody, but for some, they do want that information, and it creates a process
Yes.
and frankly just transparency and awareness of what's going to happen. Because with
Absolutely.
or without that law, that requirement, that child's going to find the donor because
Y-
23andMe exists and all of this
Exactly.
stuff. So it's really mostly an educational component to make sure the donor and the family know what's going to happen. Right.
Yeah.
It is going to happen. Someone's going to knock on your door or send you a message on Facebook.
Well, and something for everybody to know, having mandatory open ID at 18, again, is very basic. Over 15 countries have an open
Yeah.
ID policy, whether it's open ID at 18, open ID at 15. Again, we are behind on this. The UK, Norway, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Sweden, New Zealand, Australia, Austria, Germany all
Yep.
have banned anonymity. Like we are behind. So when anyone freaks out about like, but I should, but anonymous donors, that's what's normal. It's like, no, it's not. It's actually
Right.
really not. We are behind in it because systematically separating donor conceived people from their genetic knowledge is like, that is archaic and it only serves the industry. It does not serve
hmm
the families
hmm
and it does not serve donor conceived people and it doesn't serve donors.
Oh, absolutely. Because again, I mean, they're going to be found.
Yeah, they're going to be
The
found.
question is everyone going to be aware of and kind of did everybody consent
Exactly.
to what's going to happen, whether this a law like this passed or not.
Yeah.
And I will say, like to me, the 18 is the magic number. I mean, I maybe some people disagree on this, and I know other countries do things differently, but that's when that so, so-called child is no longer a child,
Yeah.
right? It is their decision. In the United States, unfortunately, LGBT families are clearly under attack
Yeah.
still, and so I do think it's important to put on out there that doing it sooner than 18, legally mandated at least, can potentially lead to threatening families. And so it is,
I
some people disagree with that. I
disagree.
get it.
I would disagree with you
Well,
on that one,
if
but
you're in like a deep red state and we don't know what the future holds, um, I can understand why people would be nervous and anxious about legally mandating ID release prior to 18, if that makes sense.
no,
So just,
I think it's totally makes sense. The reason that I
yeah,
disagree, the reason that I do, is simply for when you do an open ID at 18 donor, and it's like, and I want to be clear, like I think open ID at 18 donors are like that's a huge step forward. I don't want to take away from what that is, but I do
yep,
think that there is a sort of false sense of security with that because you still, if you do an open ID at 18 donor, you're not meeting that donor. You have no idea who that person is.
sure.
If you do a known from birth donor, you know who that person is. There is a safety with that.
Oh,
And
sure.
and I do think that it's like because we in the donor conceived community have spoken, we've talked to donor conceived people who do find out that their donors later on in life are incredibly homophobic. And
hmm
I think that if we are, and right now the political atmosphere that we are going into and we're looking at is terrifying right now. I would much rather, especially as a donor conceived person, know that my donor, know that my parents consented to a donor that they know, that they trust, that they did all the legal framework so that if shit goes down, we know that that donor is a good person and is going to respect that family unit, and like we can work together as like an entire unit. And because when you do an open ID at 18, you just have no idea who that person is. And that person
For
could,
sure.
and
And
that would be my thing as to going, I totally get that point of view, but I think that there's still a yes and.
yeah, no, I think that's right. But I also think it's important to distinguish between a known donor
Mhm.
and an anonymous donor that becomes known at 18,
Oh,
right?
yeah, sure.
So like a known donor, sure, I think for a lot of families that's going to make the most sense, right?
Hmm.
Because they trust them, they
Yeah,
personally know their medical background, they can verify it. Maybe they just know they're a good person and they
yeah,
want that person's, essence to be in their family.
yeah.
And that's great. And I know a lot of families that have done it that way. But if you are going to go to a commercial bank and
Yes,
you're
I
not allowed
completely
to know
agree.
that donor,
Yeah,
then I do think for especially given the political atmosphere in some states,
sure.
it is important to not at least advocate for a legally mandated
Hmm.
release prior to 18.
No, that I totally understand. And also, I do want to always underline the fact that if you do go down the known donor route and you do a known donor from birth, please do all the legal steps, do the second parent
Yeah,
adoption,
get a contract.
get a contract, get the
Yeah.
lawyers, do the whole
Yeah, it's like
thing.
a surrogate
Everybody,
in some ways, right? You
it
just got to,
you
yeah,
have to
it's
do
like,
everything. Yeah,
yeah,
it's this is
just to
not.
cover, and it protects
Yeah.
everybody,
It's not a DIY
right?
situation. You need to get professionals involved because it's like, yes, you are going to spend some money up front, but it's a much lower cost to spend that money up front than the literal tens of thousands of dollars you might end up spending in court battling parental custody.
Or
So
therapy
or therapy, yeah.
for,
So
yeah, for your
please,
child
if you do a
after
known
things go wrong.
donor, and there are lawyers in every single state. Like I have lists on my Instagram of all the lawyers who do the
Mm-hmm.
second parent adoptions, who do this kind of thing. Please, 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 always do it. Especially in this political atmosphere. Oh my God, like don't,
Yep.
don't not, don't skip those steps. Um,
Yep.
but anyway, so we had this amazing bill. We had this. So what I apologize. What else was passed in this bill? Because I know what was also part of it was required educational materials.
That's right. So, a core aspect of this bill really is informed consent, and
Yeah.
that's for families as well as donors. Obviously, it's hard to have informed consent for the donor conceived child because they don't exist yet.
Hmm.
But a lot of this really is based on the acknowledgement that because that child doesn't exist,
Hmm.
we have to be extra cognizant to make sure that everybody involved is aware of the consequences, the benefits, the risks, et cetera, because that is what is going to create an environment where that child is can thrive and is brought up in a space and in a family
Hmm.
that accepts them and that they sort of like in an age appropriate way know how they were conceived, know what their background is.
Yeah.
So the education materials are for the donor as well as the family, and it's really basic. So for the donor, it's like, great, thanks for being here and helping create a family. Here are some basic facts about genetics and reproductive issues that you should know about.
Because like
Things that like you should have learned in eighth grade.
yeah, but we've
But,
spoken to
you know,
donors who don't realize
oh
that
yeah,
they are the biological parent of the child. Like I've messaged with egg
absolutely.
donors who are like, "No, I'm not the genetic parent. I'm not the biological parent.
Right.
They
I
took
didn't carry the baby.
I didn't," and they were like, "Yeah, no, they put the parent's DNA into my egg." And I'm like, "What the fuck is going on?"
Yeah,
Like
it's not exactly how it works, people.
you that people don't understand this. It's
Yeah.
incredible. And but we also have recipient parents who go like, "Well, my blood was pumping through the
Right,
child,
right.
therefore it's genetically mine, so my medical history is theirs." And it's like, how? How do we it has
And
given
and
me concussions.
yeah, and to be fair, genetics aren't everything.
No.
But they are something. You
We
can't ignore
can't
them also.
disconnect, we can't discount them.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
do exist, and it's like,
Right.
yeah, genetics are weird. Like they're freaking strange. But that's the thing. Our knowledge based on how genetics work is still very primitive. And
Yeah.
so yeah, and again, as you said earlier on, every doctor, when you go into the doctor's office, always says, "Hey, what's your family history of heart disease? What's your family history of
Hmm.
cancer?"
Hmm.
Everyone does.
Yeah, and stuff that's stored in your genetics. And so, at the end of the day, these materials are really to make sure everybody has a baseline level of understanding of what's about to happen. And we
sad.
can make fun of it and say it's kind of sad and all of that. And all
But
that's
it is
true.
needed,
The
like
reality
clearly.
is, yeah, I mean, clearly people need to all be on the same page because we have seen that they
Yeah.
often aren't. And
Yeah.
so it's to make sure that it's to protect the donor also. I think in the donor conceived space, a lot of times, people look at it and they think like, oh, you just hate the industry or you hate donors and you think
Mhm.
it's all evil. And of course, that's not true. And if you're donor
Yeah.
conceived, you owe your existence to this, right? It's like this is not taken lightly. It is something that folks just want to make sure everyone is going into it eyes wide open, knowing the situation, so that down the road, nobody is surprised, and no one can say that they weren't informed or they didn't know about what was about to happen.
People really don't seem to understand that two things can be true at once because it's like, yeah, I'm as a donor conceived, and I don't speak for all donor conceived people because I know that there are some people who do feel differently, and I want to make
Hmm.
space for that. But it's like, I'm happy to be here. I'm very, very happy to be here. I love my parents. I really do. And that is a true statement. What's also true is I have some massive issues on how this fertility industry is run,
Yeah,
on how
yeah,
I was lied to, how my parents were lied to, and how I was treated like a commodity and the
absolutely.
blatant unethical activities. And it's like we can have the reason I do the advocacy that I do is because I do care about my community and I do believe in donor conception and I do believe in fertility and reproductive care. And I'm like, it should be better. Like, there's no,
Absolutely. Well,
it's pure
and the
greed.
thing that I hate, you've probably heard this, but from the folks who don't think we need any laws or regulation around it, and they're not
Yeah.
always, they're not like on the left or the right necessarily. I mean, it's not partisan. It's different. But it's what I hate to hear is when people say, "Yeah, but we don't regulate like." When someone has a one night stand after
Oh my
meeting them in a
God.
bar and then they have a child,
Yeah.
like anybody can procreate, whatever. It's like, yeah, okay. But in this case, there is a middleman. There is someone profiting. There is an industry, a
Exactly.
commercial
Exactly.
activity
It's
that
a
is creating this human.
multi-billion dollar industry that is profiting
Yeah,
off of it. And
yeah,
just like any other company, any other industry, we need common sense safeguards. I always kind
yeah,
of make the like
yeah,
we're literally asking for the equivalent of a seatbelt.
yeah.
That's literally the
Or
fact
yeah, or
that
like, like we're asking for like a basic disclosure
yeah,
that whatever like we require this of all kinds of products or
mhm,
services or whatever.
yeah.
It's like, hey, just so you know, here's what's happening,
And
and here's
yeah,
our license framed in the lobby that says that we're certified and we
yeah.
we follow basic laws.
There's more regulations around cattle breeding. There's more regulations around dog breeding.
Yeah,
There, like I learned when I got my dog, I had more information about her lineage than I did
yeah,
about me.
yeah.
Which was like, are you like there and it was all regulated. It was like, yep, this is ever all the information. This is everything you had to go. It is certified. Here you go. And it's the same thing with cattle breeding. Like you have the lineage of that cow. And it
And they
is,
do that because
yeah,
without it, people get ripped off or they're
exactly.
told something that is inaccurate. You're told it's a purebred or whatever the
Mhm,
hell, right? And you find out, and a lot of those regulations came from the industry
mhm,
because they knew there were bad actors
mhm.
that were bringing down the quality of their industry or their
Yeah,
practices. And so that's it's basic consumer protection is what we're
it's
talking about.
it really is. And again, I always come back to the fact that the fertility industry, there's no other industry like this because no other industry profits off of the creation of sentient human beings.
Hmm.
This industry should be held to the highest standard. This is the fact that t-shirts, cars are held to a higher industry than human beings is absolutely deplorable. And it is
Hmm.
something that people should want. And when anyone gives that whole like one night stand, like, well, you don't regulate one night stands, it's like you're also not spending upwards of $10,000. Like, and that's like parents spend easily
Yeah.
$10,000, easily drop it. Um,
Well, and that one night stand can be life changing.
yeah,
and results in a potentially a
Mhm.
lifelong commitment if a child comes from that. It's not something to be taken lightly. I mean, we
No.
joke about it, but like, I mean that could create a human and change the
Mhm.
course of everyone's life, and
Yeah.
we should make sure that human that comes about is entering the world in a welcomed space, and is thought about, and that we consider how they are raised and what information they know about their background.
The other big difference is typically if you get pregnant off of a one night stand, chances are it's a mistake. Like chances are that was an
Hmm.
accident. You didn't mean to do that, and now we're just all figuring out what the hell we're gonna do. Donor conception is obnoxiously pre-planned. It is
Oh yeah.
such an like this is something that every single party, besides the donor conceived person, obviously, everyone's in an agreement. Contracts are signed beforehand. I mean, this is donor conception. Going through donor conception could take years. This
Hmm.
is like there is no accident with this. This none whatsoever. So the fact that anyone it's comparing, it's not just apples and oranges. We're comparing like apples and chairs. Like this, it's just not the same thing.
Agreed.
One of the other things that I also really like about the bill is that it added in permanent record keeping,
Right, right.
which is
Yeah,
huge.
so if you talk to any donor conceived person,
Yeah,
they've heard of a story where their bank was, burned down, or it had a flood
that
and
was
their records
me.
disappeared.
Mine was burnt
It's
down.
like,
That I was my
man,
doctor said that it was burnt down. I'm one of those.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's something about
Yeah.
these sperm banks that catch on fire real
There
easily.
is some arsonist going around that really has a vendetta against gamete banks and is just torching
Yeah,
all of them. My favorite is my favorite one is when the gamete banks decided to use Katrina as a reason that all the information was gone. I was like, really, assholes? Really?
yeah,
You're
it's
using
called Dropbox or Cloud, or so it's like put it online.
And I was just like, you're using like one of like our like biggest natural disasters as a reason to go like, oh shit, this is our moment, everyone. Let's go. And it's
Right,
like,
right.
throw it all away. Go,
Yeah, they're
go, go,
like,
delete it.
turns out we all stored all of the records in New Orleans.
Apparently, all of them in New Orleans, like, and they were just like right there.
Yeah,
Oh,
in the French Quarter. Yeah, so the bill requires permanent record keeping, but the real, I think, important issue is it's permanent record keeping even if you go bankrupt.
mhm.
And what that means is that when you apply for your license, you have to just show that you have a plan for what happens if you get bought, if you dissolve, if you go bankrupt, etc.
Which
That
happens
plan
all
can
the
be as
time.
simple, yeah,
It's
oh
all the
yeah. I mean, these days it's big business, so they're all merging or getting
time.
bought or whatever. And so that it's literally like you have to have a plan on paper that says, yes, we've identified such and such bank
Mhm,
that
mhm.
will inherit all of our records.
Yeah,
That's it. Or whatever, right? Like you just have to have a method of
exactly.
saying, even if we go bankrupt, when Laura calls 20 years from now, we know that her records will still be somewhere.
Yeah, that my the doctor who made me was not ready for me to call. It was a fun moment when I got him on the phone. It
Jeez.
was Yeah, no, it was I was told I was like, "Hey, I just was like curious if like I could have like my medical history, know who the donor is." And he was like, "That's impossible even if I knew who it was." Um
Do you need help finding your biological parents? Whether you're donor conceived, adopted, or an NPE, please contact DNA Angels. DNA Angels is a nonprofit team of genetic genealogists that help you identify your biological parents. And this group is run by donor conceived people, adoptees, and NPEs, so they will emotionally have your back during this process. DNA Angels has identified almost 5,000 biological parents since 2019 using test results from Ancestry DNA. And they are a nonprofit because they believe that your financial situation should not stop you from identifying your family. If you are searching to identify and possibly connect with your biological donor or missing parent, please reach out to dnangels.org. Must be at least 14 to apply, have tested at Ancestry, and presumed parents born in the United States of America.
okay, so for everyone, sorry about the technical problem. We are back now. That was fun. I enjoy a technical glitch. Nothing triggers my anxiety disorder more than when my computer fails. So we know that the Colorado bill had also permanent record keeping. It also put in penalties for gamete banks that we're not keeping up to Colorado code that want to work in Colorado.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, honestly, that part is, anytime a state licenses
Hmm.
a type of company and then regulates them, you sort of have to have some enforcement if someone just totally ignores the requirements. I don't expect that the fine capability will be used very often, or that it will
I
be,
hope not.
you know, yeah. So I think everyone hopes not, but it's important that it's there,
Yeah.
so that, I mean, any industry that's regulated has knows that they could be fined if they're a bad actor. And I will also say that most of the requirements in the law, that, some people would roll their eyes at this, but the requirement is that they make a good faith effort
Hmm.
to do some of these things. Like, we know that the 25 family limit, there might be a circumstance where, even if a good acting bank does everything they should do, that maybe there is a 26th family. And, like, I think many of us would say, well, no, you really shouldn't do that. Like, you can account for that. And yes, you can, but there might be a circumstance where, I don't know, like a family lies to them about if they had a baby or not. I don't know
Yeah.
why you would do that, but you have to just make sure that you're making a good faith effort,
Yeah.
that you're following the law. And so the fine capability for the state, I think, really is going to be for, like, the worst of the worst actor, and hopefully that actor doesn't even try to get licensed.
Yeah.
But it's important that it's there.
Of course, well, you have to have a consequence in order to ensure that the regulations are followed, because otherwise it's sort of the same situation that we've been in with recommendations from ASRM, which we clearly can see like
Right.
it's not effective.
It's not enforceable. Yeah.
No. So then we had this, our bill passed, and it was miraculous that it passed because ASRM even came out against it. I still have their tweet saved. For anybody who's watching it on YouTube, I'm going to post the tweet so that you can see it, because I literally, my reaction was, we are going to keep this so that everybody knows that ASRM did not support this bill. But it was incredible how much witness testimony we had to support this bill, and it passed. And I think like it really kind of surprised everyone that it did, which was amazing. Um,
Hmm.
and so the bill went into effect this January. Huzzah. But now something else has happened. Would you like to describe the new bill that has been
Well, sure.
proposed, which has been delightful?
So, and just before we even talk about the new bill, I think it's important to note that it passed overwhelmingly, right?
Yeah.
It passed bipartisanly. So it was really important to me. I was a Democrat. I mean, I'm still a Democrat, but I was an elected official Democrat, and I wanted to make sure there was a Republican on the bill in both the House and the Senate.
Hmm.
And because, to me, it's like, this is basic decency, and it really shouldn't be partisan. So I had a Republican on the bill with me in the Senate, and then in the House, it was a Republican and a Democrat that carried the bill. And it passed overwhelmingly. Only
Hmm.
one Democrat voted against the bill in the entire legislature. So every Democrat voted for it, and almost every Republican voted for it, except this one Democrat that voted no. And so to be honest, I knew somebody was going to try to roll it back the moment I left the legislature.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if it was just a sixth sense, even though most of the industry applauded the bill when it passed.
Hmm.
And I think that's an important note, because the industry is not a monolith. The
Hmm.
industry also shifts and changes and evolves because of this environment that we're in, where they're all, getting bought or sold or
Yeah.
invested by private equity or whatever. The leadership changes, et cetera. So, the most of the banks applauded and supported the bill once it got to its final form, because we
Hmm.
worked with them and we
Yeah.
made sure it was workable. The LGBT groups across the country played a big role
Yeah.
in crafting that bill and supported it in the
As
end,
they should.
et cetera, for sure. But we wanted to make sure that they had buy-in, and
Hmm.
they crafted it in a way that made sense.
Hmm.
ASRM, like you said, opposed it to the end.
Hmm.
And there was one small sperm bank in Colorado that opposed it to the end. That bank, I think they're small. I would generally say they don't have kind of the best practices employed that a lot of the big banks
Mm.
do actually.
We're throwing
So,
shade. I love it.
anyways, yeah, the bill passes. It's great. awesome moment. And, folks work with the regulators to do implementation. There's a lot of
Mhm.
stakeholding, blah, blah, blah,
Mhm.
boring stuff for most people.
Mhm.
But it's important because the implementation matters just as much as the law to make sure
Yes.
it's implemented correctly. And everybody played a role in that implementation for the most part. And it went into effect January 1st of this year.
Mhm.
And then licensing wasn't going to take effect until July 1st of this year.
Mhm.
So we actually gave, 6 months of sort of okay, like it's the law, but we're not enforcing it
Mhm.
because we want to make sure everyone, we're going to help everyone come up to speed and figure it out and make sure they're ready to apply to get licensed.
Which is like, I feel very generous.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I mean, and I was very cognizant of this because the last thing I wanted, right, was to be the first in the nation to pass a law like this, and then it's a complete disaster,
Yeah.
right? Like I
Oh,
didn't
this
want
is setting a
Obamacare on my
precedent.
hands. Yeah, I didn't
That
want the Obamacare websites to crash, kind of thing.
we needed
I
this to
wanted
work
this to be a
smoothly.
good, yeah, of course. So, and then, in my last few days of being a legislator, I had the hunch that something probably was going to happen in the future.
Mhm.
And so I actually wrote a long letter about the intent and like my hopes for the law. And I
Mhm.
sent it to CDPHE, the public health department that implements the law. And
Mhm.
they've been incredibly helpful and great in standing this program up. And I knew it somehow, right? And I mean, we had heard rumors that maybe somebody was going to try to do this.
Yeah.
We didn't know who. And so we actually had been reaching out to one of the lobbyists that we know represented California Cryobank since like September.
Mm.
And they never really gave us the time of day. They wouldn't allow us to really have any real conversation.
Oh,
And
what a
then
cute
one
little red
day,
flag.
yeah. And then one day we find the bill and it gets introduced and we finally get a meeting set up, but they won't meet with us until after the bill is introduced. So
I
we had
was,
but none of us had any role in like providing feedback on the
I
bill
mean,
before it was
from
introduced.
what's been expressed to me, is that you guys found the bill 6 months before it was introduced. Like you knew that this was happening, or like you knew that this bill was happening, and
Yep.
was actively trying to reach out to it, going like, "Hey, can we like maybe talk about it? Can we have a meeting?" And directly cut out of the conversation. So it wasn't that even donor conceived people were not part of the conversation. They were deliberately cut out 6 months before the bill six, and I want to be very, very clear, 6 months before the Colorado bill went into effect. And I feel like that's very, very important because only 1 month after the Colorado bill went into effect, this new bill was introduced,
Hmm.
claiming
Yeah.
all of
Yeah.
the negative impacts of the Colorado bill. But this new bill was, we at least know at least 6 months ahead of time.
It's
They
a
were
really
already
good
writing
point.
it.
I hadn't thought about that. It's funny because they claim
Yeah,
that
exactly.
they had to do the bill because nobody was donating anymore because the bill was having such a negative impact. But you're right, they wrote it
Mm-hmm.
before the bill went into effect. I didn't
They
think
wrote
about
the
that.
bill before it went into effect, claiming
Yeah.
that no one's donating anymore. When it was like you wrote it before the bill went into effect, and on
Yeah,
top
that's a
of
really good
what,
point.
so and deliberately cutting donor conceived people out of it, and then when you introduced it, it was only introduced 1 month after
Yeah.
the original Colorado legislation was put in. And then they were like, "Oh my God, no one's donating." One, let's for even argument's sake, let's say for argument's sake, if there was like a miracle that happened, and let's say they didn't start writing it until a day before it was introduced. Let's just say like they are
Sure.
such busy little
Sure.
beavers. Only giving a bill 1 month is still ridiculous. Like that's no way. Like you have to give a bill way more time to see like how it actually sort of
Well,
moves and goes.
especially considering most of the industry
Mhm.
has now said, actually, this bill hasn't had any impact on donor drop off. I don't know
Oh
if
my
you know
God,
about
that
that, but like
I didn't. I'm not surprised,
so
but please.
Fairfax,
Mhm.
Seattle, um, the Sperm Bank of California, which I would say they're the gold standard. It's a nonprofit that was established in the 80s specifically
Mhm.
to help lesbian couples and single moms. and a new small organization company called Cascade Cryobank. These companies have actually come out to say we actually support this law.
Mhm.
We've had no negative impact from it,
I
and we don't know what this
also
other bank is talking about.
Also, just to drop one more name, Seed Scout has also said, of course, we support this bill, who's a known donor agency for, and
Right, right.
yeah, they've also, like, I, yeah, no, that
Yeah,
we've had a lot of industry come in and go, like, no, we actually do support it because we've been kind of following these regulations. Like, this has been our company's policy.
right, right. So it was written by one company essentially, right? It's California Cryobank, which is owned by Cooper, which is a massive company,
And
publicly
Donor
traded,
Egg Bank
billions of
USA,
dollars.
right?
Don't yeah, but they're owned
But
by
they're owned by
Cooper.
Cooper Surgical,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
So
yeah,
Donor
yeah.
Egg Bank US, for anyone who doesn't know, Donor Egg Bank USA, California Cryobank are both owned by Cooper Surgical. Cooper
Right.
Surgical is a massive, huge company that owns all. I mean, they also ordered the cord blood bank as well. Cord
They own a cord blood bank. It's like a medical device company.
Yeah.
Like
I was at
they make
the
my contacts. They make my contacts that I
I was
wear.
at the OBGYN and I look over and like one of the big instruments, it just says Cooper
Oh yeah,
Surgical on it. And I was just like, God damn, they do everything. Holy shit.
yeah, and they're like modern medicine is fascinating and does
Yeah.
amazing things and saves lives and is great.
Mhm.
But it also is a huge business.
It's a huge corporate. Yeah,
And
it's a huge business.
yeah, I mean they it's also important to note that they have bought up a lot of smaller banks, is my
Hmm.
understanding. So for instance, Northwest Cryobank, I think it's called, was bought by
Yep.
them. And like
Northwest
I have
Cryobank was absorbed by California Cryobank.
yep. So all like,
Mhm.
if you donated there, if you conceived with their
Yeah.
services, et cetera, it's all housed now at Cooper.
Hmm.
Um,
Really incredible
and
how that happens.
Cooper, it is important to note that Cooper was involved in writing the bill,
Yeah.
the original bill, and they supported it and
Uh-huh.
applauded its passage, but they have different leadership now. So, the best I can explain is that the bill for a lot of these clinics or banks, it's not going to change much because they already do some of these practices.
Well, they claim they
But
do.
what it does,
I
they
want to
claim they do,
say
but
they claim they do. But we know
well, and the
as donor
important thing is,
conceived.
yeah, many of them don't or haven't in the past, at least. They it removes accountability. So, it's important to claim that you do and to do
Mhm.
it. It's also important to have accountability to ensure that you follow through with that.
Exactly.
What their bill basically does is removes that accountability.
This new bill that was introduced, it removes the permanent record keeping. It no longer requires the banks to follow up with donors. It no longer requires them to tell parents that like you need to report the birth. It removes it no longer requires the educational material. And that was written by donor conceived people, Colorado lawmakers, all the LGBTQIA groups, and it allows industry biased, non-evidence based material.
Hmm.
It took away the penalties that we were speaking of. If any of these gamete banks are not following Colorado code, it removes the penalties. It allows, this was the weird one to me. It allows the banks to make donor conceived people sign an NDA upon receiving the information about their donor when they hit 18. So their parents bought an open ID at 18 donor. Their parents bought that. That is what they bought. But now the banks are allowed to make donor conceived people sign an NDA that you are not allowed to share any information about your donor, even with your parents, which I'm like, that is a, I hope you stretched. I hope you stretched before you made that fucking reach.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah, no, it is.
insanity.
It's unconscionable,
It
really. I mean, it's like,
is.
what the hell?
That's
Yeah, it doesn't make
absolutely
any sense.
ridiculous. But then, okay, now here's where it gets really fun, and I really want you to talk about this. The bill was proposed, like the title of it is all talking about that this bill is
Yeah,
protecting IVF. Now,
yeah.
obviously, in our political atmosphere, we know that IVF like has been under attack. It's been a huge controversial subject. My question is, why the hell is a bill that is labeled all about protecting IVF have all this shit about unregulating donor conception when IVF is not donor conception and donor conception is not IVF? IVF is a medical is a medical procedure. Donor conception is a medical practice. Why the hell
Hmm.
is this snuck into that bill?
Well, I think it's obvious.
I
And that's
want you to
because
say it.
so I think that in this day and age, in this moment that we're living in,
Mhm.
it is political suicide for a Democrat to be against a bill that supposedly protects IVF.
Does the bill protect
Now,
IVF though?
well, I don't think it does anything for IVF because everything in this bill that supposedly protects IVF, which is two things, it creates a fundamental right to IVF,
Mhm.
and it says that if that any other state
Mhm.
that doesn't allow IVF or
Mhm.
doesn't allow disposition of embryos, et cetera, crazy town stuff.
Mhm.
If they want to prosecute somebody for using IVF or destroying their embryo in Colorado, the state isn't allowed to participate in that prosecution. It's a shield law, is what it's called, and
Okay.
these were passed all over the country recently, mostly around protecting abortion, and we have one in Colorado. And my point is, those are the two things the bill says it does. Those two things are already the law in Colorado.
So it's just
We
so
already
it's
we already have a fundamental right to fertility care, which is IVF. We
uh-huh.
have a shield law that says that no other state is allowed to prosecute somebody for using IVF or having an abortion or destroying an
Mhm.
embryo in the state of Colorado. And so those two things are already the law. Basically, they copy and pasted that existing law, which I voted on. And in fact, the sponsor of this bill also was the sponsor of that bill. So I
So
think she's probably
so
aware.
she's probably
And
aware that this law already exists in Colorado. So they made a law that was entitled I don't remember the exact title of the bill, but it's basically it's all about like IVF protection. Is even in the title. It says like we're here to
yep.
protect IVF, but the IVF protections that are in this bill, Colorado already has into law, but then it sneaks in all of this deregulation of donor conception.
Yeah. And
I
that
mean,
what it's the ledge deck, which is the legislative declaration, which is like the preamble to the law in their
mhm,
bill, is all about Alabama court case
mhm,
that
mhm.
basically said killing destroying an embryo was like killing somebody, which is crazy town. And I think
Mhm.
Alabama has passed a
They
law
have,
now to
yeah.
reverse that.
It's been revoked
Yeah, I
because
mean,
it was.
even they are like, yeah, maybe that's not good.
I
Um,
think that was. I think Alabama. I genuinely think Alabama just really. I think they, in my opinion, and this is my own thought on it. I think Alabama was trying to force embryo adoption, and ensure
mm,
that no one could discard a leftover embryo, because they wanted to boost embryo adoption. And they didn't consult any doctor, they didn't consult any physician. So they wrote this not having any
right.
idea it would pause IVF completely. And I think as soon as they realized it, they were like, "Oh shit!" Because if you
Well,
look,
these judges are like fundamentalists. I
they're
mean, they quoted the
fundamentalists.
Bible in their court ruling.
Yeah, well, if you listen to the interview of Tommy Tuberville of Senate of he even said he was like, I think this is going to help people give birth more. He even says that children are our greatest commodity. He said like, I think this is so great. So many more kids are going to get born, and people are like, no, they're not, dude. They're not. You literally stopped IVF. It's actually going to
Right.
prevent people. I genuinely think their intention was to force embryo adoption, which is absolutely ludicrous in my
Yeah, it makes
opinion.
sense that was something they would, conceive of.
I think that
But
that was the
but like
intention and they fucked up. And I'm
it
go
has no impact on Colorado.
yeah.
And we made sure of that by
Hmm.
passing the Shield law several years ago that says that it can't have an impact. We also codified in state law that an embryo is not a person.
Hmm.
So that alone says that you can't prosecute someone for disposing of an embryo because it's
Yeah,
not a person.
exactly.
So, um, long story short, they copy and pasted this other law, hoping everybody would forget that we already passed it and put it in a different section of law.
They were
That's
just
basically what
they
they did.
basically were doing the equivalent of like Elmer Fudd, just going be very, very quiet,
Yeah.
hoping
Well,
no
and
one
they
was going to
added a few
notice.
things. They said for you have a fundamental right to fertility care, then they define fertility care. But within that definition is the fundamental right to donate sperm or eggs, which is odd because that's a fundamental right then for the donor. But reproductive care is really meant to protect the patient
Well,
who's trying to reproduce, right?
and here's the thing that I find to be really strange. Here's the thing. I think that everyone should have equal opportunity to be a donor. I mean, obviously, I don't
Sure. Oh,
think that
sure.
they should not be discriminated against, but no one has the right to be a donor.
Yeah, it's
Um,
very odd.
well, and I also found this so funny from the fertility industry when they were going like, everyone has the right to be a donor. I'm like, not according to you. You are the
Oh,
most
totally.
you discriminate against donors who are under 5'10". You discriminate against
Yep.
donors who don't have a college degree. What are you talking about? You are some of the,
Hmm.
I'm like, the fertility industry has a very long history of eugenics, of being racist as hell, of being homophobic and not allowing gay men to donate. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm like, if you want to actually talk about discrimination, we can have that conversation. But you're going to be the first one to answer it. So when they started going on that virtue signaling rant, I was very taken aback by that because it
Yeah,
was,
it doesn't make. I mean, it's like it's an interesting like debate discussion,
yeah.
public policy issue, but it's it probably shouldn't be in law, and it shouldn't be in law in this black and white type of way, because
Well,
it just brings up so many questions that no one knows how to answer yet.
Well, I think the way to look at it is, again, everyone should have the right to equal opportunity for a job because in the United States, being a gamete donor is a job, and there are certain things that you have to agree to for that job. Now, I think everyone should have the same opportunity for it, but you don't have the right to that job just
Hmm.
as long as you don't have the right to get hired by a law firm or hired to be a server. Now, there shouldn't be any discrimination based off of gender, race, ethnicity. Like, there shouldn't be any discrimination towards that. But if you are not comfortable with what the job requires,
Yeah,
then you shouldn't, then no, you don't have the right to that job. If a job requires you to know and to be fluent in Spanish, then that's what the job
yeah.
requires. In the same way, being a gamete donor in Colorado, you have to do open ID at 18 at ID at 18. That's a requirement of the job. A requirement of the job is you have to update your medical history. That's not
Hmm.
stopping anyone's right to be a donor. It's just that's what the job requires. And I was
Yeah,
very
and if
like,
you don't want to agree to it, then you can't do it.
then you
And
can't do
and
it.
and
And
I
that's
think
fine.
I think that's in there to allow for litigation down the road to invalidate the entire law,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that was,
right? Because it can't coexist.
yeah.
You can't have a fundamental right to donate
No.
and also not be allowed to donate if you're under 21.
Yeah.
Like, how do
I
those two things coexist?
so it again was that this was the industry, but this is how the fertility industry has always operated. They've been doing all this backshit shady stuff for decades by being racist, being ableist, and now they're turning around and going like, well, everyone has the right to be a donor. And it's like, if we want to actually address the discrimination that you all have been participating in for since the industry has started, we can have that conversation. But there's a huge difference between being genuinely discriminatory and
Hmm.
having um job requirements. There's two fundamentally different things. And it is, I'm like, yeah, of course there has to be job requirements to being a donor. Of course there has to be. You just should not
Right,
be discriminated against, based off of race, which is what the industry currently does.
right, right. Yeah. So I think the IVF stuff in the bill is not genuine, to say the least.
Well,
And
you said it
to be honest,
in Sorry, you said it in the hearing. You said it would be political suicide if any Democrat in this current political atmosphere voted for a bill that was labeled as protecting IVF. And
yeah,
the fact that
yeah,
you
and that's why
called,
it's there.
yeah, the fact that you called that out, I was in New York listening, going like, fuck yous.
Well, and the thing that pisses me off is that like the IVF discussion going on in America right now is incredibly important.
Hmm.
And to essentially like exploit people's anxieties in this like
Yeah,
moment that we're living in in order to get a political win on something totally unrelated, I think is just is wrong, to
yeah.
say the least.
Hmm.
And also the other thing is, what I said earlier, the original Donor Conceived Protection Act was passed with overwhelming bipartisan support.
Yeah.
It really hurts me to think that like, okay, so you just added on this IVF shit,
Hmm.
And now suddenly it's a partisan issue. Like they've made it so no Republicans probably going to really vote for their bill. It's like it's become partisan when it never was and doesn't need to be, because they added something unnecessarily to it that is almost like feeding into America's like culture war at the moment.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help anybody.
Mm-mm.
Doesn't help IVF families, doesn't help donor conceived people. It doesn't frankly help anybody except maybe the industry.
Well, and I'm also very ticked off at the Democrats who are part of sponsoring this bill because I'm like, I'm sorry, you've sponsored a bill that deregulates a multi-billion dollar industry. You're actually following in the
I know.
footsteps of the Trump administration. And I'm like, you are,
But yeah, 100%.
and it's like you're
And
being very MAGA right now, and that's very frightening to watch from somebody who should be the biggest champion of, I'm like, the
well,
biggest
it's two things.
champion.
It's the deregulatory stuff that you're saying,
Mhm,
which is concerning
mhm.
because regulations are there for important reasons.
Regulations are
But
what
then
got us,
secondly, yeah,
airbags.
yeah. But I also think secondly, almost deeper is this like this thing where like, you know, we often say, I say we, but I often say, or other Democrats often say, MAGA is kind of like a cult these
Yeah.
days,
Oh
right?
God,
It's just
yes.
like whatever the man high above says is what we
Yep.
believe. And
Hmm.
it's not based on any actual ideology, etc. It's
No,
not
it's
that
it's
different
what it's
when
whatever
you,
Jim Jones says. Whatever Jim Jones
yeah,
says is what
yeah,
goes. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
totally. It we can't call that out and at the same time not allow for nuance on
Yeah.
our side, where if the letters IVF are next to each other in a bill, you put on blinders and you're not allowed to consider any nuance. It's just like I'm a yes because I'm part of this organization or this
Hmm.
group that has said from high above, if the letters IVF are there, I'm a yes and I can't ask questions.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm a wholehearted believer in IVF. We should
Yeah.
provide access,
Of course.
but allow yourself the nuance to be like, wait, is this about IVF or do these belong together or does this make any sense from a public policy perspective?
Well,
And it,
speaking.
and it it's hurtful that people aren't like allowing themselves to have that nuanced discussion.
And I mean, I think speaking very, this is very, selfish of me as a TikTok content creator, but it was kind of how the TikTok ban was like snuck in another bill.
Sure.
It was like, guys, there was no, like, the fact that it was snuck into this other bill was like absolutely ludicrous. And it was a very interesting kind of like civics lesson for everybody. And it's the same thing
Well,
with it.
and Trump hated TikTok and then suddenly he loved it, and his
Yes.
followers like slingshotted back and forth with however he felt that day.
Again, it's whatever Jim Jones says that day, whatever
Right.
he wakes up and is decided is, the word from God, which is just genuinely him. Um, but it's very frustrating for me to watch because I'm a very proud um leftist, very proud progressive. And the fact that I'm watching, I would say, my wing of the
Hmm.
political spectrum be so heavily manipulated by a multi-billion dollar industry is very, very frustrating because I'm like, the issues that donor conceived people, donor conceived families are fighting for, I'm like, this should be the most low-hanging fruit for our side of
Hmm.
for our political side. Like this is so simple. And the fact that this is something that a lot of Democrats are just turning a blind eye to is extremely disheartening. Because we sort of pride ourselves on being the party of like we're human rights. We're
Hmm.
all
Hmm.
about
Science,
we're about science
facts.
and
Yeah.
statistics. And I'm like, all of the countries that are significantly more progressive than us, all the countries that have better LGBTQIA protections, all have a well-regulated fertility industry, all have significantly better donor conceived protections in it. And I'm like, this is a huge hole within the Democratic Party. And I'm like, and always kind of how I explain it to people is which party, I would say stereotypically, tries to deregulate
Hmm.
corporations? Which one? This is
Hmm.
very, I'm like, this is typically what we fight. Like, we are all about adding in common sense regulations to ensure the average Joe is protected. And I'm like, and this
Right.
is a bill
Right.
that was written by a multi-million dollar company to deregulate itself. I don't under how anyone who considers them progressive, leftist, liberal, Democrat can look at this bill in good faith, genuinely like, and be like, yeah, this is good. This is 100% right. Like it is, I find it to be extremely alarming, and I am so upset at the Democratic sponsors for this bill.
Yep. No, I mean, I am as well. And I've had conversations with them. And honestly, I think, it's why so many of us wanted to talk to them before the bill was introduced.
Did they genuinely like, in your professional opinion, do you believe that they really didn't understand what they were doing? Like they genuine or were they are they being intellectually dishonest? Are they doing this in bad faith? Like why are they doing this?
It's hard to say. I don't want to impugn them because I don't know what's going on in their heads. And these are people I've worked with, right? I mean, they're friends in some ways, and I think some of them honestly felt like, okay, this is a bill about IVF, so I put my name on it. I'm a good Democrat. It's 2025. I support IVF. I think some, or maybe one of them, knows much more what the bill actually was intending to do.
Mhm.
One of the sponsors is the only Democrat who voted against the bill in 2022.
Mm.
So clearly there's an underlying understanding of what's going on here
Yeah.
by her, is what I would say. But at the same time, I'm not going to say that she is just a shill and doesn't believe in what she's doing, but I think it's probably based on incorrect or incomplete information that she's been told by people that she trusts, right? There are folks in the industry that feel passionately about making sure everybody has access to creating families, that are maybe just have blinders on, right? And they don't like change.
I
And there's
would,
some people that feel personally threatened
I mean,
because there's
I,
something about like people's children growing up and knowing family secrets that
it's,
threatens people.
I'm gonna push
It's kind
back.
of gross.
It's so gross, and I'll push back on the accessible because it's like if you want to make donor conception more accessible, I am all for that. I love
Mhm.
that. Your industry is not accessible. Your industry is fundamentally
Yeah, and
not
I don't agree
accessible.
with it.
Yeah, and
I'm just saying that's kind of where they're coming from, I guess, right?
but that's always like when I push back, I'm like, if you want to make it more accessible, then let's talk about removing your ableist recommendations from ASRM. Then let's
Hmm.
talk about the history of racism that exists within your industry. I have donor profiles from 2022 that have derogatory racist slurs on them. Like it's like then we can have that conversation. Let's talk about how
Right.
the clinics
Well, and
are still
and it's also
incredibly
like,
queerphobic.
sure, and sometimes predatory,
Extremely predatory. It's
right?
like, then we
Like,
can have it. Or you want to make it more accessible, then where is every single bank and clinic standing on business to support fertility fraud legislation to ensure that no
right.
doctor will switch out the chosen donor gametes for their own? It's like,
Or doubling down
yeah,
on recruiting donors from underrepresented communities because there's a lack of African American,
yes.
Latino, et cetera, donors in their inventory. I mean, like,
Then it's like we can have that conversation, but saying that permanent record keeping is going to make it less accessible is absolute bullshit. Like that is
well, totally,
pure
it's all bullshit.
propaganda.
And the reality is like none of this stuff is going to create more donors by
No.
repealing these requirements. It's just going to mean less accountability for the industry.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like if it did create more donors, like if they were to say with a straight face, look, if we educate people
Mhm.
with neutral fact-based educational materials, they're not going to donate.
Mhm.
If that's the case, you got to stop yourself and wonder, shit, does that mean that without the educational materials, we're sort of like tricking people into donating?
Yeah, if you the
And then what
only
happens down the road?
If the only way you're able to get donors is a lack of informed consent, then there's a fundamental problem that you have to look at.
Totally.
I was
Totally.
talking to a doctor who I was saying, like, yes, we should absolutely have open ID at 18. And he was like, absolutely not, because he's like, as soon as these kids find out who their biological parents are, they will abandon their parents. And I'm like, one, that's just fundamentally not true. Like, we can, like, sorry, that is not true in the least bit. Not in the least bit.
No,
But
no.
let's play this game right now. If you do think that that is true, and you think that every single child is going to, upon finding out where their gametes came from, is going to just immediately go to their biological family members, then that tells you then there's a problem within donor conception. I'm like, then
Mhm.
then isn't that clicking
Well,
you?
adoptees don't do that. No one would say like an adoptee, the moment they find out,
Yeah,
that they're like, oh, screw you guys, I'm out.
it's
I'm going to
it's
go hang out with
fundamentally
this.
it's not true, and even
It's
if it
disrespectful
it's
also.
completely disrespectful, and it's like it's completely disrespectful to the donor conceived person, in like I take extreme defense to that, but also if since you believe it is true and you're still doing it,
Hmm.
don't you then you fundamentally know that then you believe that there's an issue within donor conception, and you're actively trying to take
Hide
away
it.
informed consent and hide it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
do you guys not? But it isn't true. Like it just isn't.
Well, and
I
I mean, the donor doesn't like want to be this person's parent,
no,
and the donor conceived person doesn't want to suddenly like have some stranger as their parent. Like
no.
it's not sensical, but it, it's based on nothing but fear,
It's
right?
genuine. Yeah,
It's like a self consciousness or feeling like I don't know, you're not enough of a parent or whatever it is, right? It's based on fear. It's not based on reality.
I think it really feeds into. I think it adds to the toxic, like kind of heteronormativity and the nuclear family, and I think that that's really it protects the nuclear family, which I'm like
Hmm.
I'm always like very frustrated because like we constantly talk about how it takes a village. It takes a village, which is completely true. And that's what donor conception is it takes a village.
Right.
Yet we are doing everything we can to protect heteronormativity and the nuclear family. And I'm just like, guys, we need a which way is it? Does it take a village or is it about the nuclear family? And that's what anonymity does, is it basically pretends like no one else was involved. We are going to erase everything, and it is just
Hmm.
singularly that. As we are coming to the end of this episode, there's two things I want to do. Is one, I want to tell everybody exactly how they can help prevent this passing of this new bill, how they can stand up for donor conceived rights. But before we go into that, is there anything else about this bill that you would like people to be aware of?
Well, no, I mean, I think overall the bill, I think is disingenuous, and I think it's
Mhm.
it's something that rolls back very basic protections. And again, just to reiterate, many banks oppose it. They actually think it's harmful and dangerous,
Yeah,
and
many
hurts
banks.
people.
Well, one thing we didn't really talk about was and I know that you have to go somewhere, so I want to be brief about it. But we did have our first initial hearing, and that's when
Hmm.
I heard you, and I heard you, and I quote, calling this bill a hot mess, which was delightful. But but I know banks sent in letters opposing this bill.
Yeah.
Are we allowed to say which banks?
Well, they submitted a letter to the committee, and that's public record. And I believe the signers of that letter were Fairfax Sperm Bank, as well as Fairfax Egg Bank, Seattle Sperm Bank, uh, um,
And Sperm Bank of California.
the Sperm Bank of California, and maybe U.S. Fertility was involved, which is
Well,
more of an IVF network.
and I also know that Cascade did, they
And
came in for
Cascade, yeah,
testimony for amendments, for amending the bill, going like, and I heard them talk about like, yeah, this is not cool for donor conceived people. That's obviously a
yep.
very small summary of it. But I was very surprised actually on how so much of the industry came forward to oppose this.
No, I think it's really heartening, and it,
Yeah.
I know like you know it's hard to say that overwhelmingly like one actor is good and one is bad, but I think it really shows a bit of a sea change, and it'll take time to turn the ship around, and make sure that everything is according to what we think are best practices, I guess. But I think it means it really is significant that this many banks not only are don't support this change, this law, that they support the underlying law, but that they're going out of their way to make that
Mhm.
clear.
No, they
I think
absolutely
that's
are.
great.
Um, and I was very like listening to all the testimony at the hearing. I mean, we had on our side so many different voices. We had donor conceived people, we had doctors, we had lawyers, we had recipient parents all coming forward going like, yeah, no, this
Hmm.
bill is not it. Whereas when I was listening to the opposition, significantly fewer, I should say people who were supporting the bill had a lot fewer voices. And I felt like it to me, I felt like the people who were supporting the bill, if I summarized their testimony, it was literally just the banks don't wanna. Like
Hmm.
that's
Yeah.
what it sounded like to me, was just it's not gonna be convenient for the banks. It wasn't that they couldn't even do it. It wasn't that they don't have the capacity to do it. It wasn't that it's the right thing for the banks to do. It's just they don't wanna.
They don't want to. Yeah.
Yeah. That's literally what I felt like the opposition, the
Well, because
testimony was.
they never did need to.
Yeah.
And it's change is hard. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, it's not the Wild West anymore,
Well,
guys.
that got
We're
buttercut.
acknowledging that you should,
Yeah.
yeah, we're acknowledging that you should probably follow some of these best practices that you have said you already follow because it's all within ASRM guidelines.
So, as we sort of wind down, what can people do to support this bill? Well, I should say not
To
to,
oppose
what
the bill.
to oppose this bill. What can
No,
people
don't
do?
support the bill.
Don't support the bill. Well, support our original Colorado bill, but
Yeah,
what
yeah,
can
yeah.
people
Yeah.
do to
So
absolutely oppose it?
So the bill is still in its first committee in the House, and that they laid the bill over is what they call it when they delay a vote because, like I said, I think they realized it's a bit of a hot mess and they want to work on amendments. We haven't really had any conversations with the bill sponsors on amendments since the committee hearing, which is a little disheartening. But it'll come back to committee soon.
Okay.
And what I would say is the more people can make their voices heard, the better. And tell your personal stories if you can. And if you don't have a personal story, that's fine. You can still be an advocate for donor conceived people and for reforming the industry. And so I would say if you can weigh in, especially if you're in Colorado. Most importantly, if you're not in Colorado, reach out to your friends who are in Colorado. I'm sure everybody out there knows somebody here
Well,
because everybody and their mom have moved here recently.
two
So
of my donor conceived sisters are in Colorado, so love them.
nice,
And they will
nice.
be. But so I'll be asking them, be like, hey, do you have a moment? Should they be reaching out to the bill sponsor? Who
They
should
can
they
reach out
be?
to the bill sponsor. The easiest thing they can do is just go to no on 1259.com. So no on 1259.com. It's
Okay.
just a little website that was created to inform people on what the bill does.
Mhm.
And on that site, you can take action. You can just click a link and send an email to actually the entire Colorado House of Representatives, just to be like, hey, this bill's not the answer.
Mhm.
It's a mess. You really need to go back to the drawing board if you want to fix something, and you need to include the right people in the room to have that conversation.
I mean, I think that that should be the first red flag to everybody, is that donor conceived people were not just left out of the conversation, we were deliberately cut
Right.
out. And it's like you
Yep.
wouldn't do that to any other group. You wouldn't write a law that was about creating, I would say, like parentage laws to support queer families without the queer community there. Like that would be
Or like
absolutely,
rolling back disability access requirements
yeah,
without talking to people in the disability rights community, right? It's like
yeah.
you just wouldn't do that.
You don't write bills about us without us. Like that's
Yeah,
absolutely asinine, and that's bad practices. And the reason that they did it was because they knew it was bad. They know it is. That's
of course.
why, and you can see that it's why they've labeled this an IVF protection bill. It's why they cut us out of the conversation. It's clearly this bill is in bad faith, at least in my opinion.
Yep.
And as to quote you, this bill is a hot mess, which I think we should all put on a t-shirt. Um, So everybody should make their voices heard. I will have all the information. I will have the links. I will have the email addresses. I will have the names all in the caption for this episode. So it's going to be super, super easy. I'll even have a template email as well if you just want to start. Um, anything else besides contacting? Anything else that somebody can do?
Contact. I also think it's important, especially if you're not in Colorado, think about how to get similar laws introduced in your state,
Mhm.
because the way to make sure this can't be rolled back in the future is if it just becomes the norm. And we do that by getting it introduced one state at a time. And we really need a second state, right? Colorado's still the only one. We're on the verge on a few others potentially, but we need a few other states to ban anonymity.
Is New York on that list? Because that's where I am.
New York's on the list, but New York's tough, just politically speaking. It's kind of a machine, so I think it takes time there.
All right. Well,
But
you
I do
tell
think there are some
me.
states like Oregon and New Mexico and a
Oh,
few others
Oregon
that
would
are
be
looking at it.
great.
Yeah,
Well, you tell me what you need for New York, and I'll whip New York into shape. 'Cause
awesome,
that's my
awesome,
home. That's my state. Um,
great.
so Steve, thank you so much. Is there anything that I have not asked you that you're like dying to say, like, oh shit, just add this one piece in?
No, I don't think so. Mm-mm.
Okay, perfect. Well, Steve, thank you so much for all of the work that you have done and the continued work that you've done, even in retirement. And I apologize to your wife profusely that we've pulled you out of retirement.
Oh,
But
it's all good.
thank you again for making this time and have a lovely day.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for having me.